Okay, and we're back. At this point with the Web Dev Essentials, what we need to do is discuss an entirely new topic. So we've covered number one being the essential applications for Windows to be installed. So of course, if you haven't done the first couple of videos, you'll need to work your way through these. Our second section here was cascading style sheets and all about how to implement style for your HTML documents. And then finally, this third section we bit out was the JavaScript section, where we got into defining what JavaScript is, how to use it, and also talked about the DOM, the document object model, and how to manipulate your elements as programmable objects. So at this point, you have enough knowledge to be working on a website or web application built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you were to do so and build, let's say, several pages or sections of that application, eventually you would end up with enough source code that you would need to manage that source code. And so that is what I want to talk about next. So we're going to talk about something called version control for your source code. Because once you are have a significant amount of code, or you have any code that needs to be shared, for example with a team, then you're going to need to have version control over the code. So let's go ahead and add the section here. It's called version control. And let's see what we're going to need to cover in this section. We're definitely going to want to cover kind of a look back on what the different version control options are. So let's just list out I'll just call them version control systems. And let's see, after that we're going to want to look specifically at Git, which is the version of version control or the type of version control that we're going to be focused on using. And then you're going to want to also talk about GitHub. And then let's tie it all together and go for how would I go about using this. So let's say using Git with an IDE like VS Code, for example. And of course it can be used with more than that, but that's what we're going to focus on. So if we do a good job here, we'll have some nice content around version control and specifically Git, GitHub, and how to use it with VS Code, which is Git is the modern version control to go with for now. So let's talk about it. Version control. Okay, I've already got a Wikipedia pulled up here, and I want to talk about this first. So what we have here is article saying source code. Pardon me. So in computing, source code, or simply code, is a plain text number programming language. The programmer writes the human readable source code to control the behavior of the computer. Because remember, when you're writing code, you're a human writing code that a machine needs to understand so that you can manipulate the machine or have the machine automate a process. So that you develop an app using that code for your app becomes your source code. And the first bit or grouping of that code that you put together initially for that app is probably a simple, small set. And then as soon as you add one feature, two feature, three features to that app, or even enhance one of those features for that app, the source code gets larger and more complex. Um, and there can even be different versions of it that you may want to need to move between, or there may be a version that you're ready to release to production, but there's another version you're still working on that you're not ready, and so you get into what we call branching as well. But um, essentially, source code is the value that you're producing as a developer. So it is essential for there to be a system to help maintain it, especially when you have a team with multiple developers contributing to the same source code for the same application. That's the key. How do we collaborate together on an application and build this source code out, but also be able to manage it and the different versions of it? So that's source code, but source code itself is kind of the challenge. That's what we're producing and what we need to manage, because as we produce more and more of it together, it becomes a management challenge. Enter version control. What's version control? There we go. Version control. Note source control redirects here. Oh. So if I say version control, I can also say source control, essentially the same thing. If I say source control system versus revision control system, essentially the same thing. So version control, what is that when I say version control? It's also known as revision control, source control, source code management. It's the software engineering practice of controlling, organizing, and tracking different versions in the history of computer files. So of course you want your code to be organized. You're going to organize it probably into a specific project folder where you write the code, where you put all your HTML documents, your CSS files, your JavaScript files, etc. Those are all going to be organized into a single directory of project folders and files, right, for that specific project. And when you start another project, you're going to start another set of those. So that's the thing. Also, tracking different versions. So by default, you might have an organized set of source code files for an app you're working on, but by default, that no matter how organized it is, it won't have tracking of different versions of it built in. You would need to implement version control or source control in order to gain that. So let's see if they talk about different types of version control systems that are available. I see there is a history here. We can probably jump to going pretty far back to 72. Not familiar with that. So the older one I would be familiar with would be Subversion, which I've definitely worked with in my career. And then they mention Git. So for me, the way it started out with when I first got in the industry and started working with code and with version control, I used Visual Source Safe. Of course, I did start off on the Microsoft track, so that's probably why. So for me, the starting point when I think of version control would be Visual Source Safe. Not something you want to use today, by the way. As you can see, it's discontinued. So you wouldn't want to use it today. It came out in '94, which explains why I'm familiar with it. So I probably started coding a couple years after this, and final release was 2005, 19 years ago. So yeah, if you were still using this in 2005, you were definitely using an older version, and I think Microsoft had already replaced it with a version, a TFS source control version. So, but yeah, this was the first one, Visual Source Safe. At least for me, it was, and it does date back to '94. Of course, there's stuff out there older than that, but if I was going to throw something on the list for version control systems, the first one I would think of would be that. The next one that would come to mind was one they referenced in the previous article. If I go back in history, they mentioned Subversion. Subversion is a very popular source control system, also known as SVN or abbreviated as SVN. It's called Apache Subversion. It was an open source control system under the Apache license. So this meant it was free. So the system itself was free. There might be programs that provide UIs or tools for it that weren't free, but underlying you could download, install Subversion, and use it freely. I don't believe Microsoft's Visual Source Safe was free, so yeah, that there is a difference there. I think you had to pay for Visual Source Safe, and it probably came bundled with some of your Microsoft products like Visual Studio, but it wouldn't have been free. So this was the first big free one I worked with. So I'll put Subversion on here. Subversion's not the best, by the way. There's still people using this today. I mean, it's still a valid source control system. I don't think it's been made obsolete or anything. But as you can see here, released 2000, 24 years ago. So it's been running since then, but it's pretty old. And what I don't like about it is it does make for a dirty file system. They have a file system section here where they show off this Subversion tree. I don't like all of the different folders and files it creates in order to manage the source code. It kind of trashes your directories and adds all these unnecessary files, in my opinion. But that's how that system works, and that's how it manages the source code. So that's just part of Subversion. But at this point, I prefer never to use it again. So why would I never use Subversion again, or Visual Source Safe for that matter? Well, that's because there's something more modern now. So going back to, I'm on the history section of version control. We have Git referenced in here, right? The next generation after concurrent version systems was dominated by Subversion, followed by the rise of distributed controls such as Git. What is Git? Git is another specific type of source control system. This is the one to use today. Looks like it originally released in 2005. So I guess about the time Visual Source Safe from Microsoft was dead, Git was the replacement. And so it's been going for 19 years. But this set shows no indications of stopping. It's very elegant. It can manage source control locally. It can manage source control remotely. That's why you're going to see it called out as a distributed version of source control or version control. So a form of version control in which the complete code base, including its full history, is mirrored on every developer's computer. That's the local tracking of the source code. And that means it can be deployed, merged, and retrieved from any other developer's machine, which also means it can be deployed, merged, retrieved from a server as well. So it can work without a central server or with a central server. A lot of times when you do have a source code, what we call repository, here we go. A repository is a data structure. We should probably add this to our terms. See if I can get it out of there. That's a simple definition, but okay. And copy this and go ahead and add this to your terms because it is kind of key. So on the term side, we can go in here and say that a repository is what we're defining. What is a repository? In version control systems, a repository is a data structure that stores metadata for a set of files or directory structure. I guess if we want to be picky, we could also define version control in here. So let me put that back above repository, version control. How do you define that? We should be able to go back and get that from here. Version control. The software engineering practice of, copy this, And that adds our terms up to where they need to be. And I'll let the T off of there. Okay, so we've got the version control into your terms here, which then you can say repository, and it references version control, but you have a definition for that here as well. Cool. So repository is what we're talking about. Usually you will have a repository, so a data structure that stores metadata for a set of files or directory structure. Because if you want a centralized repository of the source code files for the team to collaborate on together, then it makes good sense to have that repository centralized on the server and then give the team access to that repository. And let's say you're all using Git because that's the type of source control you chose to implement, not that you have to, then you're in a really good setup now because you can have the remote server and repository, but you can also manage any branch or version of that code you pull down to your local workstation as a developer. That can all be versioned up and tracked and changed and modified and managed on your local machine as well, even before you commit it back to the server. So that's essentially what we're talking about here with version control. And Git was the last one. We kind of jumped off of Git quickly though, getting into those terms. So let me go back to Git. What we had here is that going to go right here. So Git is the distributed version control system. And now that I say that out loud and we've talked a little bit about this, that should start to make more sense to you what I'm talking about. It tracks the versions of files. It's also often used to control source code by programmers who are developing software collaboratively. This is the modern version control or source control system to use. If you learn Git today, you're going to be using it on the job the rest of the year. I can pretty much guarantee you next year, the following year. I mean, thanks to GitHub, Git's not going away anytime soon. Just like I wouldn't expect open source libraries on GitHub to go away anytime soon. They seem to be getting more and more popular, actually. So Git is probably doing the same thing. Let's also point that out, though. I'm making reference to GitHub, but GitHub is not Git. So Git is this specific version of source control. GitHub is not Git. What is it then? GitHub is a developer platform, not a source control system. It's a platform that allows developers to create, store, and manage their code. So let's just capture that definition and throw it in our terms. In case later on you're thinking of Git, you're thinking of GitHub, and there's any confusion there, this one term will help keep that clarified. So I'll just put GitHub in as one more term on our terms tab. And what is GitHub? Two A's. A developer platform that allows developers to create, store, manage, and share their code. That's simply what GitHub is. It's just a specific one of those. It's not the only one of those. But right now, it's probably the most industry standard one of those. We've all kind of ended up at GitHub, which is nice. It's a great system. So I can understand why it's as popular as it is right now. Could there be something better in the future? Sure. I can't see what that is. So until then, this is it. So and it doesn't matter what code you're working with, by the way. You could be using this for JavaScript. You could be using this for HTML files. You could be using this for image files. You could use GitHub to version and manage anything. You could version and manage PowerPoint or Word files if you wanted to. Those aren't really code files. They could end up as files inside of an applications directory, though. So really anything that developers are creating as far as files go, they're creating them, they're storing them, they're managing them because they're coming back and updating them and whatnot, versioning them, and then eventually sharing them. Because otherwise, what's the point of writing on the code if you don't share it? So GitHub covers all of that, and we do it using Git. So Git is listed. So we just mentioned GitHub, and we even defined it. And Git is essentially the modern distributed version control system that is being used today. GitHub, well, we just defined it in the terms over here, is essentially, I would say, probably one of the most popular developer platforms that allows you to do this stuff. You should know with GitHub, this is now owned, I'll just say currently, by Microsoft. Um, not that Microsoft owns Git. Git is still open source, so I guess we'll point that out. Currently, GitHub is not. I mean, when you think of GitHub, think of GitHub.com, the website. So it is owned specifically by an organization. It wasn't always owned by Microsoft, but as you can see here, it has been a subsidiary of Microsoft since 2018. So they bought it. Very wise of them to do so. By 2018, JavaScript libraries like React were very hot and mainstream, and there's a lot of other huge open source libraries on GitHub that people are organizations at this point are dependent on it. Developers are dependent on it. A lot of source code is being written with libraries like React, which was created by Facebook and which has been provided as open source on GitHub. So, yeah, it's there's some more details about it here. Commonly used to host open source software development projects. So if you've got a proprietary application with some source code you're writing for it, and you're going to keep it private to your organization, and maybe you're going to sell it or license it to other organizations, but they're going to have to pay for each license or instance of that. You're not giving that away for free, and you might not even give them the source code to that. You're going to give them a compiled version of that software that or service that you would like to sell or license to them. That would be private source code. That would not be open, publicly available source code. So you would not put that type of source code on GitHub because it's private. But if you were building some type of JavaScript library that was going to be a tool or a plugin or whatever to be used by other developers across whatever JavaScript project they were working on or whatever web app they were working on, then that's something you're wanting to share with the community. You're wanting to possibly give it away free and have that project gain the benefits of it being a community project and being open source so that lots of other developers could be collaborating with you on that same source code because you're exposing the source code, you're publishing it onto a platform like GitHub, and it's now something anybody can download, anybody can author a new version of, or if they find a bug, check in a bug fix for, and the version of that code gets leveled up throughout the community as the community discovers it and makes use of it and finds bugs or adds feature enhancements to it. So it really becomes like any other project you would work on with a team, but it's globally available to everybody because it's now open source and free. And so is the source code. That is the type of project you would put on GitHub. So, I don't know how much more we want to say about that. Let's move on. Do I want to jump into using Git with the IDE yet? I don't think so. We kind of need to take Git and we need to take GitHub and we need to use these together in order to get started because we need to create a repository. We're probably going to create a Git repository of code, and then we need a place to manage and share that repository so that we can pull different versions down of it or check new versions of it into it, etc. Add new files to it, etc. That will be GitHub. So let me start there and work our way back to Git so we have a destination in it for the repository. Start one and then start making changes to it using Git. Okay, so if I could get this started, no pun intended there. I'm gonna do so on GitHub. Let me sign into GitHub. I'm here on the GitHub wiki right now anyway. So let me just the URL should have been down here on the bottom. I was expecting. Oh, there it is. Been a while since I logged directly into GitHub. Been working with a lot of repositories on Azure via Azure DevOps lately. So usually if I'm going in a repository, it's in a Azure DevOps. All right, so here it is. GitHub landing. It doesn't know who I am. This is the default experience, what you should see if you go to GitHub right now. But what if I sign in? Sign in. Okay, what's your username? Pretty sure it's on my Gmail. It'll be LanceSteven at Gmail. I don't think I put this in my Hotmail. And oh geez, what's that gonna be? I might have to do a forgot password. Let's see. Whoa, we got right in. Okay, so obviously I remembered this password. That's good. So once I land in, it's showing what my top repositories are, and giving me updates about different repositories I might have interacted with in the past. There's one here called FreeSO that I've interacted with. You should you could tell just by this here that this reference that what's FreeSO? Oh, it's a re-implementation of The Sims Online. What? The Sims Online, as in the Maxis, The Sims? Yeah. The Sims was a very popular uh, game on both PC and consoles. Um, and then eventually there was a Sims Online version of it. Didn't last forever, died, and then there was a community open source effort called FreeSO, and that's what this is referenced to. So even game repositories exist, open source game repositories on GitHub. So it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a tool or a library for development or an app for development. It can be uh, video games as well. Doesn't matter what the files are. So that's why you're seeing some of that on my dashboard. But let's say we needed to create a new repository, something brand new that I haven't really worked with on here yet. How would we go about doing that? I'm seeing a new button here. There's probably a menu up here too where you can say projects, and I'm guessing if you go under projects, you can say that you want to create a new one. Um, Looks like they've done some updates. So projects created by me, projects recently reviewed by me. So if I'm under recently viewed, I can say new project here. And then I can decide how I'm going to create my project. I can search through templates and pick one of the existing templates, which is probably a good idea instead of start from scratch. What are the different templates? Team planning, manages your team work items, features release, GitHub manages your team's prioritize work items. You can have a Kanban board, a bug tracker. Oh wow, they've added a lot to this. Um, hmm, a team retrospective. Wow, looking very agile here, GitHub. I wonder if Microsoft had anything to do with that. So we could just start from scratch or pick a template. The first template is team planning. Let's see what happens if we go with team planning. Okay, untitled project. I don't think we want it to be called LanceSteven's Untitled Project, so we're going to come up with a better project name at least. So what would this project name be for this example we're doing? This isn't a real project that I'm going to collaborate with you on. This is something to demo the repository and Git. So let's see. Let's call it Somebody probably already has this. If I say my first GitHub, my first Git repo, it's probably gonna conflict with somebody else's. So I guess I will use my name to try to make it more specific. Perhaps you shouldn't use my name. Perhaps you should replace your my name with your name. So I'm gonna say Stevens first uh, repo and just call it that. We could say GitHub repo, which would be more specific, but I'm just gonna call it Stevens first repo, and that's at least a non-generic project name, and hopefully there's not one already out there called that. Okay, so because of the template I picked when I created Stevens first repo, it went ahead and threw a backlog in place here. There's swim lanes with to do, in progress, done. Very agile type of board setup. There's team capacity, another agile concept when doing project planning. The current iteration. Yeah, so this is interesting. So now when you create a repo in GitHub, it tries to also go ahead and get you to use an agile process with that project. So it really wants to, it's really treating this like you're starting up a brand new software development project with a team. So that's kind of cool. Hopefully it also created a place for me to have my files because that would be essential. So all of this is kind of like fancy features added on. But what about the repo itself? Add your first item, click add item, get started, use the shortcut. These are items. I don't think items are actually the code, are they? That's weird. Okay. Well, we need to be able to get into this repo. So, let's see here. Workflows, archived items, make a copy. I think make a copy is probably what we need. I'm looking for how do we clone it. You have no unread notifications. Oh, so I guess the project is Steven's first repo, and I need to create my first new repository underneath it. Okay, that makes sense. So I'm up here on the top menu after creating Steven's first repo. Maybe you're creating something called James' first repo or John's first repo. And then up here, under that, you're going to have create new, and you have new repository or import. So if you have an existing set of code, you could import that here. If you're creating it from scratch, you could create it from scratch here. You know what? We do have a set of files. They may not be amazing, but if we go to our C workspace and you followed along in previous examples, you should have some files here. If not, you're going to need to create some files here to follow this. So you might have to backtrack on the videos. But remember, we have C workspace, and underneath it, we do have our web dev s project files here. Let's use these. So we're going to use webdevs as the first set of files. In fact, I probably should have named this repo webdevs, but whatever. So that's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to try to bring this folder of files in. So it's going to start here at this folder down as the repo. So in case I need that name, let me just copy it so it matches exactly. Properties on that, and I can copy the name and get this out of the way. Import repository. Okay, so it wants to know what files should you import. Your source repository details, the URL for your source code repository. I think it will create one by default for us, won't it? There's my username and password. The owner is Lance Steven. What's the repository name? This is what I wanted to create, webdevs. So I believe it will use that to build in the URL. And here's a key decision to make. I'm the owner of these files, but am I going to make this a public repository on GitHub where anyone on the internet can see the repository? But I can choose who can commit changes to those files in the repository? Or do I want to make this a private repository? You choose who can see and commit. So you're not opening it up to the internet. It's not an open source project. Maybe it's more closed. Maybe this is for a corporation or an organization, and only that org or corp is going to have access to this. You can do that as well. Let's do that. Let's not make this public. Let's make this private for this example. And let's say begin import. We didn't point it to the folder yet. Okay. The URL for your source. Okay. So it needs a URL, and it cannot be blank. And they give you an example. Are they saying I already have to have my repository on an accessible URL? Because I just want to bring the files in. Uh-oh. I think they are. I would have already had the files in a version control system. So this is an epic fail. So we're not importing because we don't have them in a files repository already. So cancel. And what was that option? Import. Let's choose new. Okay, it's going to be very similar. The owner Stephen Land, the repository name, this makes more sense. Put the web dev s in there. Okay, the description, it's going to be web dev essentials. And public or private, same concept. Do you want it to be an open source project? Anybody can get into it, or do you want it to be private? You're going to control who has access to it. Maybe only your org is going to be allowed. Those users with those GitHub accounts are going to be able to get in there. Do you want an add, a README? Yeah, it's a good idea. And add, get, ignore. Not for now, later. Choose a license. Nope. Create repository. Here we go. Now we're going into business. So there it is. We just created our repository. We have a set of files that we should be able to check into it. But the path I took originally, where I was saying an existing repository, that was wrong, because I would have need to have a GitHub repo already, or a Git repo, I should say, already with a URL accessible that GitHub could have pulled from. And I don't have those files currently in a repo set up like that. So that was my mistake. It should be a brand new repository in this case, even though I do have a set of files I plan on slamming into here. Okay, so the README is what it's showing us right now. We told it to add a README, so by default, it's just spinning one up and calling it webdev and the description that we gave it, and that's all that's in the README. But we can edit that right now or later. It's in the root of the project. We'll leave it alone for now. It's the readme.md file. So that's really the only file in there right now because we told it to create that. We need to add more files to this, which means we're going to need to use Git in order to clone this code and then add additional files or code to it and check those files into this repository. So up here they give you some different options. Add a file. You could literally create a new file right from in here, or you could upload files right from in here. That might be the easy way to go. Or you can go ahead and clone this repo and start working with the repo from your local file system. So maybe that's the smart thing to do. I could cheat right now and just say add files, then go and browse to where the files are because it doesn't know. We would browse and choose those and let those be the initial set of files. But if I do that, I'm skipping out on learning how to clone and how to commit the files I have locally in my local C workspace folder up to this repository that we've created on GitHub. So I don't want to skip that. So let's go ahead and do it now. So cloning. What is cloning? And they have a question mark here for help context. Ooh, and it left the UI when I did that. So I can go back. Let's right click and say open a new tab, shall we? That way we have what we're looking at here as far as the UI in GitHub, but we also open this help documentation into the next tab. About remote repositories, GitHub's collaboration effort, blah, blah, blah. A remote URL is Git's fancy way of saying the place where your code is stored. That's legit. The URL is essentially the endpoint to your repository of code. That URL could be your repository in GitHub or another user's fork or even a completely different server. And they're giving you different examples of those, how to create remote repositories, and I assume they're going to start talking about cloning. Yep, they do. So this is what we want to do first. We want to clone it so that we can create a local version of this repository. Then we can start adding files to that local because it'll track the version control locally. Then we can push the local changes up to the centralized repository in GitHub, and that means anybody on our project can then pull those down, and that's how this flows. So really, to get your Git source control party started on GitHub, you're going to want to clone that repository. You can do git clone from the command line, or you can do this stuff from inside of your IDE, which is going to lead us into doing it in VS Code. So follow me along. This is going to make sense in a minute. We're going to start the command line, and we're going to work our way in through these commands, and then eventually show you how it all plugs into VS Code, okay? So first thing we got to do is we got to git clone. That's the first thing you got to do. Also, I think we need to have had Git installed on our system. So pause with me for a moment because I'm not sure if the system I'm on has it right now. Let's find out together, shall we? So if we go to our start button in Windows, we can do cmd, which will give us a command prompt. We can go ahead and open the command prompt. That'll put us at a default command prompt based on our user profile, which is fine. If you want to get out of it being C users, we can say cd, which is change directory, dot dot, that'll go back up one if we hit enter. We're now in C users, cd dot dot, that'll go back up one, that'll put you at C. Good place to be, right off the root of your C drive. Now we're going to say git and hit enter. Ah, geez, it's not recognized. We don't have git installed. So in order to actually clone and work with these remote repositories, we are going to have to install git. So how are we going to get git installed in our system? And let's see, do they have an installer help here? There should be one right around here. If not, we're going to go hunting. Well, start your journey about GitHub and Git. About Git. So we need to get it installed. Where do I start? Create an account on GitHub. They don't talk about Git really. They mention it, but we can click here about Git, and we're going to need to install it. And they kind of go back into GitHub and Git commands. So they're not giving you a lot of information about Git, just a little bit. So let's get more in a new tab, and I'll be at I'll be at DuckDuckGo. So I'm now in a new tab at DuckDuckGo, and I'm going to put git. Hey, look at that. Git. It's git-scm.com. That looks right to me. There's the icon of Git all lowercase. Local branching on the cheap. Why on the cheap? Because Git's open source. It's free. It's a free and open source distributed version control system. It's also currently the version control system. There's documentation here on how to use it. There's downloads here on installing it. And look at this from the very home page. Download it for Windows now. You know we will. That's what we want. So let's get this downloaded. Click here to download the latest. They have standalone installers for 64-bit. This will default to 64, so let's just go here. And there it goes. It's downloaded. That's now in my downloads folder. So if I want to see where that is, That's right here. And if I want to install that, I could just run it from here. Windows is going to freak out and be like, "Well, you're trying to run an exe. What are you doing?" I want to go ahead and run that. Thank you. I know what I'm doing. And here's the public license. Of course, I'm going to read all that right now, and I'm done. Next, program files. It wants to go to C program files Git. I recommend you accept that. It's not going to be huge. It has a certain set of checkboxes here. Do you want additional icon on the desktop? You know I do. Do you want to check daily? No, thanks. Do you want a new bash profile? I don't think so. So the only thing I'm changing is I'm just adding the additional shortcut to the desktop, so I don't have to manually create that later if I want it. Next. Next. Wait, what was that? Don't create a start menu folder? No, let it do that. Next. Use Vim. Yeah, it's fine. Next. Let Git decide for the name of the initial branch or new repositories. Or override. I think I'm going to accept the defaults. Git from the command line and also from third-party software, that's recommended. Yeah, keep it on that because you are probably going to install third-party tools. In fact, you already have one installed. You just don't know it yet. It's in VS Code. Next. Okay, use the bundled open SSH or use an external. Bundled is fine. Next. Next, we're just nexting through all this. Checkout style, that's fine. Next. Default terminal or the Windows default console. I think we want the Windows one. Yeah, go with the Windows default console. Next, choose the default behavior of git pull, fast forward or merge, rebase only over fast forward, leave it on the default fast forward or merge. Next, and then the git credential manager. Use the cross platform or use a very specific one. Leave it on the default. Enable file caching. Yeah, leave the defaults. And finally, we're done. So there's quite a few options there. Don't deviate. Don't run off in the weeds on your own. Follow me, and then you can go back and reinstall Git later if you want to do something crazy. Okay, that was easy. It's done. We now have Git. It says you can launch Git Bash if you want, or read the README notes. I don't care to do either of those. Finish. It's now installed. That's all I wanted. I've got it installed. I'm back at the Git home, and I have it installed. Before I go off and running and using it, while you're on the Git home here, go ahead and click on documentation. Make a note of this. This is a good reference to have. You may need to come back in here and reference this documentation again later, or you'll do Google searches that will land into this documentation later, because you're going to need some help with Git commands down the road. So under version control in our tabs here in our Notepad++, I'm talking about Git. Right below Git, let's put a reference in. Documentation. Boom. You're going to want that. So go ahead and make a reference. Get it in your bookmarks later. You're going to need that. And so that documentation is there. So if you come in here not knowing Git, like maybe you are now, and you want to know, well, how do I clone a repository so I can get started? Then you could probably jump into this documentation and find the clone documentation. You could probably just search for that. So if I'm not seeing clone jump out at me here, which I'm not, then I can probably just search clone and get, here's examples of clone under the Git clone documentation page. So I'm now looking at the clone documentation here. What is git clone? Clone a repository into a new directory. Simple. Oh, okay. Clones a repository, new directory created. Creates remote tracking branches. Awesome. So clone is how you start, really, which is why I used that as the first documentation example. Now, we were opening this document up about GitHub and Git because we were over here and we were ready to use clone, and remember I initiated it from here. So let's go back to here. This is where we started this whole party, which led us to installing Git and bookmarking the Git documentation. I can clone with HTTPS, this protocol, or that protocol. Let's stick with HTTPS. It's the most simple way to get started. Notice if I click HTTPS, it has a URL here. Notice the URL goes to github.com, which is where this project is. Land Steven, which is who I am, meaning that I own the source code repository under me on this GitHub, so it's mine. That's why it's under me. WebDevS, that's what we chose to name this repository, as you see. That's the URL to all of this. Copy it. We don't need to manually copy that or fat finger it in. We can just hit this here and we have that URL copied. With that URL copied, we can then go about cloning. So for example, get my notepad back here. That's the documentation. But what we want to do now is clone example. That's going to be something like git, which is how all of your git commands start, space, clone, space, and then you paste that URL. It's very simple. It's very elegant the way they've built Git. So all you need to do is just learn some basic commands on what they do and what to pass to them, and you're going to be off to the races, and you're not going to forget this stuff. It's real simple the way it's designed. Very elegant. So git clone, that's it, my friend. So if this is what we're going to do at the command line, let's get our command line back out. Here it is. I've got a lot of stuff on the screen right here, so I'm just going to do a CLS, which will clear the screen. And now I'm just at the C prompt. If you're not at the C prompt because you closed your command line, let me just do that again. If I were launching it for the first time, CMD brings it up, open it. It's open, but again, it defaults back here, which is where you might be. CD dot dot, that'll get me up to CD dot dot, that'll get me up to, now I'm all the way to C, CLS, and here's how I'm back at C with a clear screen. That's where you want to be. If you push GIT, get, and hit enter, now you're going to get stuff because it's installed. So we can do things like check its version, clear again, get, I think it's --V, see if that or -V. That was probably not it. Is it just -V? There it is. Get -V. Hey, look, you're using Git version 2.47. So if any of your programmer buddies ever ask you at the beginning of a project, well, what version of Git do you have installed? Throw a Git -V on there. That'll tell them the version. You can copy and paste that and put that in your chat. But we have it installed. We're ready to go now. Are you ready, kids? Oh, I'm getting excited. Let's do this. For anybody doing this for the first time, get ready to have your little dopamine rush once this works for you. Git space clone. Whoops. And what's the URL we need to clone? I still have it copied onto my clipboard, so I pasted it. If you don't still have it copied, go get it because it was provided to us right here in the web page when you say clone. So go back and get it. But we have it. There it is. That's it. So I want to clone that. Now I'm on the C drive. So if I do this, actually this is the wrong place to do it, right? It's going to do it right off the C drive. Well, let's do that so you can see me doing it wrong, and then we'll go back and do it right. So git clone, I just said C, git clone, and this is it. That's all I told Git on my local system. If I enter and that URL's there, and I'm allowed to connect to it, oh, you need to sign in to do that. Oh, sign in with the code, sign in with my browser, sign in with a token. What do I want to do here? Let's just sign in with your browser. Okay, I think it gave me some kind of token. Let's go back. That allowed the clone to continue, it seems. So if you follow me on that, I used my browser session to get my authentication token going, and that got me through, and then it allowed me to clone this. So what happened? Well, it received all these objects, as you can see, from the remote repository. Remember, we just had a README file in there, so there wasn't much, but it did clone it. So how can I prove that to you? Well, we can go look at my file system, or I can do it from here. I can just do a dir, and you'll be looking at the C drive, and we should see off of the drive something that looks like webdevs. See that there? That wasn't there off of C before. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. If we bring up the Explorer, go to C, here's all of my default folders on C. There is the workspace folder I probably should have put it into, but notice I just did a git clone right off of C. So what did it do? Well, it only knew that I was in C, so it cloned it right to C. So it put it right off of the C drive here, which is probably not where you want that. You probably want that in your workspace along with whatever other projects you're working on, specifically this one. So it did not do that. So as it's going to go do that, though, it's going to do it with this name. And I'm realizing that's actually going to probably cause a little bit of problem because we have that as the name here. Darn it. So we're probably going to need to rename some stuff. Let's rename our local one here. So the one that's already, let's clean this up, sorry. On the C drive, we need to clean this up. I didn't intend to create that there. So off the C drive, you're going to want to delete the webdevs folder. Make sure that's the one you delete. Don't go deleting your Windows folder or something. This is the one you want to delete. It has nothing in it. So just delete that. That'll be gone. In the workspace folder right off of C, if you have webdevs in here, this is not going to be good when we go to create a repo clone. So let's rename this. I'm going to call it webdevs underscore old to explicitly leave it in place but rename it to something as old. So I could create a new web dev essentials in here now and there won't be a conflict. But if I want to go back and get these files manually, I can. See that? Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. That'll free it up to be created in here, and this time I'm going to clone it properly. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to go back to my command prompt. That's what we're focused on here. I'm going to do a CLS. And this time, I'm going to clone from the right directory. So right now I'm in C. I need to be in the workspace. So if I do cd space workspace, which is the folder I want to change to, it'll change the directory to that. Now I'm in workspace. So if I do a dir here and look at what's in the directory, I can see I'm in workspace. There's my other folders that are in workspace. So I'll do a CLS from here and I'm ready to do my clone. Now since we have done a clone already, it's in the command history. So if I hit up, 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 there it is. So I had to do a few ups. What was that, 4? So I met the path, 1, 2, 3. That was like 3. So if you don't want to type that all out again, do git space clone space and then the URL. You already did it. You just did it from the wrong directory. Now we're in the right directory, so we can literally run the same command again. Git clone this URL to this repo, but now I'm in C workspace, so guess where it's going to create it? You know it is. It's going to do it into C workspace. How do we know that's the case when it's done? If I dir, look what's in the workspace now. This is C workspace. There's now a webdevs in there. There's a webdevs underscore old in there. See? They're right beside each other. No conflict because we renamed the original one to old. Cool in the gang. If you want to look in your Windows Explorer, it's going to tell you the same story. See? Here's your workspace. There's your old that we renamed before we ran it. And there's the clone. And look, there's the README file. That came from the file that was up on GitHub. Remember, it just had the name of the repo and then the full description. So that's what's there because that's all that was added. So we're now in synchronized. We've successfully cloned that repo using Git. And the only files that are up there are the files that were up there, which means there's only files that are down here. So we're now complete in sync. I can preview that we're synchronized with that repo by going back to the command line. Git was designed to all run completely from the command line, and it's probably one of the fastest ways to do it, but I will show you how to do it in the IDE as well. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to CLS to clear the screen again. I do like a nice clear screen, guys. And then I'm going to do another git command. Follow me. It's going to be called git status. This is one you're going to use all the time. Git status. Uh-oh. Not in a Git repository. Okay, because I'm in C workspace. That makes sense. I need to be in the actual repo, guys. So I'm in C workspace. while in Workspace, I need to CD and change it to be Web Dev S, right? I cheated and used my tab, just put W in tab and found that Web Dev S is in there. I want that. So CD space Web Dev S, that'll change to that directory. Then I can do the git status, because this directory is actually a git repo. The C workspace is not. So, but C workspace Web Dev S is git status. There you go. Your branch is up to date with the origin main. What's origin main? Origin is where your repo is, like the main URL to your repo, and main is the branch that you're currently running on. We haven't gone in our repo and created a dev branch or anything like that, so we're running off the main branch, which is the default branch. That's also part of what when you set up your options, it's using the default branching scheme that you could have deviated from. This is fine. Everybody starts on main, then you create a develop, then you work out a develop, then you eventually merge back into main. Situation normal here. But we're up to date with that. So there's nothing to commit. There's nothing on our end that's changed that we need to push up there. And there's nothing that needs to come down from main. We're clean, which means every file main has, we have. Of course, it's only the one file right now, the README. Let's change that. Let's get out of sync with main so that we have files we need to send up there. Are you ready? It's going to be easy. I'm going to cheat this time. Let's get this Windows Explorer open again. We'll use Explorer. And we'll go into our C workspace. Moving kind of fast now. If you need to pause, go ahead. And inside the Web Dev S, what we're going to do is, oh, it needs files. It just has the README. We're going to go into our old. We need these. We want these files in our new repo is the idea. So let's just take them, copy these files. Git doesn't understand how you're creating the files, whether you're copying source code in like I'm doing now, or whether you go into this folder and you manually created all these files from scratch, which is another way to do it, right? I could have opened the project up in VS Code, this being the folder for the project, and I could have made my images directory, made my styles directory, put my global CSS, it doesn't understand where these files came from. I just put the files in the folder now. What it will understand is that I'm now not synchronized with the mothership anymore. So if I do the git status again, hey, you've got untracked files. These files here that you put in this folder, you're no longer synced with the mothership. You've got new files that have been added, but they're not currently being tracked. And so you need to commit these files into your local repository so that they can be tracked. This means you need to go about doing more git commands, like git commit in order to get them tracked, and git add in order to get them tracked. And we can go about doing that and stay in the command line, and we can follow the documentation to do all of this in the command line. Or we can make things a little easier on ourselves. Now that we know we have this git repo situation going, we can just exit our command prompt. And here comes the tie-in, guys. We're going to go ahead and get VS Code open. Where did I put her at? I don't see her readily accessible for me. That's odd. So let's find VS. There she is. I'm in my VS Code. And let's see how big I can make this. Stay on the screen. And I can bring up my Explorer here by clicking the button on the left. And I'm currently not in a folder really, so it wants me to get a folder open. So let's open a folder. What folder do you want to open? Well, off of C Workspace, I want to open this brand new one, not the old one, the Web Dev Essentials. This one here. I want to open that. Okay. So there it is. It does as I ask. It opens the folder. I can close this Welcome tab now. I'm in my project as expected. There's my files that I'm copied into that folder as expected. We're in the Web Dev, not the old Web Dev S folder. And look over here, source control. Hey, there's a little bubble with a 4. Why is that there? Because VS Code is looking at this same folder that we just opened, and it's seeing that you have added this folder to source control. Now, how's it seeing that? Well, I'm not going to dig too deep behind the scenes on this. You can research this yourself later. But if we just quickly look at C workspace and we look at our web dev not the old. We go in here. You're not seeing the files here because they're hidden. But if we show the folder options, so it would be view. Where did they put that in 11? Where's the folder options? Options. So you have to use this ellipsis here, options, and then you would need to say view, show hidden files and folders. This one here. Probably have this turned on anyway. So I'm going to say apply to folders. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. That turns it on for Windows. So now it doesn't matter what folder I'm going into. I'm going to see the hidden files and folders. Hey, look, a new folder showed up. Oh, that must have been hidden. Yes, it was. What's that folder, Steve? Well, it's called .git. Oh, so Git created this, not GitHub. But when you did git clone and you cloned a repo that happened to be hosted in GitHub, these got created under .git, and it's all hidden under a hidden folder, so you wouldn't normally see it in there anyway, which is kind of part of the elegant part of how Git works. Subversion follows a similar mechanism, but Subversion creates a bunch of folders and files all over the place in every folder you create, and it's a mess. Anyway, I don't want to think about Subversion right now. So that's how VS Code knows, is it saw this. So when you're in VS Code, I just showed you that to say that's how all of a sudden, if you're in the Explorer and you look down here at source control and it's seeing the exact changed files that we pasted in to this project folder, this is how. So now it's much easier for you to get these checked into source code. In fact, I'm going to make this stupid simple. I'm not even going to go ahead and follow all the commands as I should. I'm going to let the IDE dictate to me what I should do. So every commit here should have a message when you want to check files in and commit them into your repository. So it's prompting you for that to be input here, and then you also can click this commit button here. Watch what's going to happen. It's going to kind of automate using Git for us visually, which is VS Code is great at. So for the message, I want to put something in like what are these files that we're committing in to the project. So I'm just going to say for this message we added base HTML JavaScript and CSS files because we copied them in. We already had them defined in another project. These files work together, and then we just kind of threw them in. So now we need to get those committed into this one. So I'm going to hit commit then, and it's going to say, oh, wait a minute, but you haven't actually staged these, because really using the git command structure, I should have first staged them, then committed them. So look what VS Code's doing. It's going, well, you didn't do that yet. Do you want to go ahead and commit? Do you want to stage them automatically now and then commit them? Yes. Just do it all for me right now. Boom. So it handled that for you. Make sure you configure your username and your user email in Git. Okay, that's probably something we can do later. I'm going to just close this for now. And then let's do a commit. Uh-oh. Might have to. Okay. So our local Git profile isn't been created yet, and it's trying to help us do that. So let's see if they can get through there. Okay. It's opening the Git log for that. And it's saying, please tell me who you are. Go in your command and run these to tell me your name, your email address, and your name. User.email, user.name. It needs these so that as you're committing changes, we know who the user was and we know their email address. So someone can't just anonymously come in here, although you can go build a fake name and go build a real email address that's like anonymous blah blah Gmail or something. But you need to get some credentials into here. So look what it's helping you build that. So like, oh, okay, these are the Git commands to do that. Thank you, VS Code. I'm going to copy those. Thank you. I'm going to go back out to my command prompt. you're going to want to have this as a shortcut. Pin to start. There we go. And it's not one of the top apps. Damn it. It's way down here. Get something out of the top apps. Remove the photos for now. There's command prompt. Now I'm at the command prompt. I'm not exactly where I want to be, but it doesn't really matter. I can run Git from anywhere. So let's just do that. I'll just hit Control V, paste anyway. Okay, it's trying to do 2 of them. So I probably should have done 1 at a time. So that's on me. I wonder if I can still run. That's a bad idea. Okay. I'm being sloppy with this. CLS. There's a fresh command prompt. Let's start with the first one. So it is git config global user email blah blah blah. Copy. Go to the command prompt, paste, and now adjust what this should be. So up on mine, I was using Gmail, and I was using landsteven at Gmail. So that's what I'll give it for my email. That's really what it is. And that's also the account I have on GitHub. So that works perfect. So that's what my global user.email will be for Git, for my local Git installation. That's now applied to that local profile on my developer machine. So any further clones, commits, pushes I do will include this. Now the other one it's missing is my name. So let's copy that one. It's essentially the same thing. These are all in the Git documentation, by the way, that you have a link to. Just put your name in here. Okay, any name will do, but I'll give you Steven. And you already have landsteven at Gmail. I can put my last name in there. I'll just do Steven for now. And then enter. That should be accepted now as well. There's a way to go and view your profile to see that that's the case, but I'm not really worried about that right now. So I'm just going to exit. Okay, thank you, VS Code. You're very helpful. That's now done globally in my profile. Let's try the commit again. Hey, I didn't get that same error response and force of you're missing stuff. Go and please update your profile. So it took. How can we prove this took? Well, one way we can prove it took is in VS Code. If we look at our source control, we don't have any changes here that we need to go about pushing up to the mothership. There's no set of changed files here. In fact, without even going there, there's no bubble of any known files. There were 4 that were known that needed to be committed and pushed. Now there aren't any. So those have now been staged, committed. We put a comment in for that commit, and we had some credentials we had to get in place, and then they were allowed to be pushed up to the GitHub repo for this Git repository. VS Code automated some of that for us, and now that we have the credentials in place in the profile, it can do that in a much simpler way next time. So let's prove it. Let's go back to GitHub in our browser, tie a bow on this whole thing, and go back over to the repo we were at, and let's look at this repo again. Can I just refresh this? I should be able to. Okay, let's refresh it, and let's see what the files are in this repo. It's not showing me what I'm expecting. There's a main branch, view all branches. There's main 37 minutes ago. Let's go into main, and main shows, where's the files at? Let's the VS Code not get them pushed all the way up there. CD workspace, CD W tab of DevS, and we're in there. Git status. Oh, your branch is ahead. So it did not push already. My bad. It committed. This is actually a great illustration. I have the files in source control. They're in my local repository. I have not pushed them up to this remote repository. They're committed, and I could keep going and adding more files and writing more code and committing and committing and committing and keeping all those commits locally and not pushed to the origin. But if I want to push them, I can either do a git command push from here, or I can do it in VS Code. Let's do this one from here because I'm seeing it here now. And we'll do one from VS Code in a minute. So from here, we're missing, and it's telling you, you need to go get push, dude. Okay, let's do it. Git space push. So it helps you. You need to do this. I'm going to do it. Ah, look at that. There we go. We just pushed now. What if we do git status now? We're clean, which means those files better be up here. So let's go back and let's refresh. Hey, that's way more than README now. Look at this. We've got our web dev files up here. We've got our about HTML. We've got our hello world. We've got our README, which it started with, and we have our default HTML, and we have our styles as well. There's a folder here called styles with a global CSS in it. So if we look at this, this should now match what we have in our file system. So if we go back to Explorer, and you want to see it visually, C workspace, web dev, there it is. There's the HTML pages, the JavaScript, the README. Here is the styles. Now it didn't capture images. I don't think images has any files in it. That's the problem. If we put an image in here, it would go up, but it's just an empty directory right now. So that's working. Now go back to VS Code. This video is getting long, so we need to tie a ribbon on this thing. Wow, yeah, we're over an hour. So how can we tie a ribbon on it, Steve? Well, we can either add files to the repo up on GitHub and then pull them back down, or we can add a file here and push it back up. Let's add a file here because it's much smoother. So let's just say we need to put one more new web page into here. We have a default, we have an about. What do we not have? Maybe we need a contact us. That's a common one. How about if I take about and I copy it? And how about I paste that into the root of the site? I think you see where I'm going with this. How about I actually rename this to be, instead of about copy, to be contact us. It's contactus.html. Oh my gosh, what's that going to be? Well, if I go in there, it's not going to be about, it's going to be contact. And there's some style in there, that's fine. It's not going to be about, it's going to be contact. And about special content here, well, actually, it's going to be contact us. Special content here. See, even much more better. And of course, you're going to make this real. You might go in and put some actual contact information, but I'm not going to go that far. So now you want to save this change, Control S, or you can just try to close it. Are you going to save it? I do want to save it. It's now saved. So once you have your contact us in there and you've saved it, what happens in your VS Code environment? Well, I'll tell you what happens. Your source control tab changes because it knows you're using Git source control, and it knows you've added a file to the Git repository you're working on. Do you want to get this thing committed? You know I do. Okay, well then put the message in. Okay, cool. Added contact us. See this? This will let people track, other developers, what files did Steve add on this commit? This is what I added. I added the page, the contact us page. Awesome. Committed. Hey, you didn't do the stage yet. Do you want to? Yeah, I do want to do that. Okay, it's staged, but hey, you haven't pushed it up. Remember that? Locally, this is now committed, but we haven't pushed it up to the mothership yet. Check it out. Up here on this ellipsis right here, you can choose more actions. Hey, pull, push, clone, fetch. All your Git commands are under this little ellipsis here. So if you follow the documentation reference I gave you earlier, you can learn about how to push, pull, clone, which are the common ones. And you can do it from the command line, but once you get familiar with that, you know what this is. This is your shortcut to doing it from the command line. So I need to push. So I'm going to click push, and it's going to run push for me. So how do I know that's legit? I'm going to do a pull, and it's going to pull for me. But notice everything's up to date here. There's nothing out of control. So if I go back, there's nothing out of control. We're good to go. How do I know that's for sure? Let's go back to the mothership. Let's refresh those files. We're on styles. Let's go back to the main directory. Let's refresh those files. Oh my goodness, there's a contact us that was created 1 minute ago. There it is. What is that? That's this file here. Look, Stephen Land added that. Look, here's his comment when he added it. Oh. What about his comment when he added some of these other files? Well, what about when he added about? Oh, well, this is what who added it? Well, Stephen did. What was the comment he added when he checked about into the repository? Added base HTML, JavaScript, and CSS files. Oh, so that's probably the same comment for this Hello World JS. Oh, yeah, it was on the same check-in. Oh, the same dude did it. That check-in, these files, that date time. You now have a repo. You're tracking all the changes. Your team can track all the changes. You're doing it with WebDevS files right now. You could be doing it with any files on any repository that you created on GitHub, and you could do it using Git. You could do it from the command line. You could do it from your VS Code. In fact, your VS Code has the commands built into it. You can have the ellipsis here and get to all the commands right here. So that's it. That is the enchilada of version control. There might have been one or rough two spots in there. I might try to edit some stuff. I think I sneezed at one point. I'll review it and see how bad it was, and then if I need to edit it out, I will. But I think it was pretty meat and potatoes. I think it was an hour 20 or something of some pretty good stuff. And you know what, guys? I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.